stages vakawina vaisapota namujuru ndosaka vakauraya anagunda.
We have spent the last few weeks chasing Agenda 2030, trying to find out, trying to figure out what is this about. We've spoken to lots of people. We've spoken to the main actors, we've spoken to significant people, and we've also spoken to some journalists on the ground to get you the inside story. At the time, when we started asking these questions, the temperatures, they were quite high, sky high, I mean. The people involved in this, they looked like they were at each other's throats. Right now, things have sort of cooled down. The temperatures have died down just a little bit. But we believe that you have a right to know what happened in those last couple of weeks and what's been going on with the whole 2030 agenda. Who is behind it? Who is agitating for it? What are the factions at play? Because as you can imagine, there are sides to these things. There are factions to these things. There are interests as well to these things. And we went inside, did some digging for you, and we're bringing to you the inside story.
If Onyongo had not done that, that thing could probably have dragged longer.
If you noticed, the conference in Bulawayo, which made resolution number 1, that the president's term must be extended, a lot of money exchanged hands.
Now we get into the flesh and the meat. We've given you the bones, now in comes the flesh. One of those people that you heard is Ambassador Christopher Mutsvangwa. You may be wondering, so who is Chris Mutsvangwa in this matrix? What does he represent? And what kind of experience does he bring to the table? Christopher Mutsvangwa is a very long-standing ally of President Emmerson Mnangagwa. They're very, very close. At one point, both Christopher Mutsvangwa and his wife Monica were both members of cabinet. Mnangagwa and Mutsvangwa's relationship extends to their time during the war in Mozambique, and he mentions it in the interview. Outside of that, in 2017, Mutsvangwa played quite a critical role. He had been an ambassador stationed in China at some point. He had been stationed in New York at some point. He had and has very good relationships with the Afrikaner community in South Africa and the different wealthy and powerful individuals who have the say, the who's who in the SADC region. So the role that Chris played in 2017 was basically being able to speak to diplomats and sell the coup to the various players within the region. The most important ones, according to Chris himself, being the people within the South African government who initially, if you remember, they weren't quite pleased with what happened. There had been a similar skirmish in Lesotho, and I think at the time the South African defense minister had said we won't allow a coup in our backyard. And when there were reports that there'd been a coup in Zimbabwe, initially South Africa wasn't happy. I remember the protests being done and people saying Zuma should stay out of Zimbabwe's business. And Zuma himself told the SABC, I believe at the time, that he had spoken to Mugabe. Mugabe said he was fine, but he was confined in his home. And Zuma was concerned. He sent a delegation of ministers. And Mutsvangwa's job at the time was to ensure that he solved that potential diplomatic problem in South Africa. Now, on to what Mutsvangwa says about 2030. I think those words are best heard from the horse's mouth. So listen up to his interview. So in terms of in terms of direction, where do things go for us?
We're going for he wants. This guy wanted to be anointed to be president, a successor of president. So you want to remove the president, but as I said, one more remover, anoint. How do you do that? You are squaring a circle. Yeah, Mugabe did nominate. I'll give you my number 2. Number 1, this time I would know. We must go for elections. Well, that's normal for a democratic party.
Okay.
Now, can you imagine? Half of the electorate are women in this country, more than half.
Yeah.
And you have decapitated the lips of your former wife through cruelty, and you are refusing to see your children, including Wakaway naye kwauri. And you are number 1 akada kumuita pardon or amite unoramba utanza you can't do that. So he reeks of cruelty against all women in the country. Iwo wakamboda kuti amai vako kana vakaita kufambika nahuri wakamboda kuti kana zvinonzi zamura amai vako kumombe unozviziva.
Yeah, of course.
John, so he can't win, but he wants, so he doesn't want the elections. Saka president wavamita up end. Vataura kuti tiri kuenda kucongress. Can you go and sell yourself to the electorate? To the party electorate. You own a baggage yakadaro.
Alright.
Then remember, and I'm going to be candid with you.
Yeah.
If you want to know the Shona person who are not going to Uchkoro, we see the error pamberi park. Because Ara comes from the mother, error comes from the teacher.
Yeah, that's
That's the basic, litmus test of an illiterate Shona person. So he never managed to graduate from the mother's alphabet. Zvekuti wakaenda kuhondo hazviti no subject akaenda taka kuuniversity takasodzokera futi tikaenda kuuniversity. Kuenda kuhondo is no substitute for illiteracy and ignorance.
yeah. Okay. Alright. Yeah, but
So it's just these are the things which and you were commanding an army by contrivance. Uri illiterate, army yevana vakaenda vachibva kuTegwani, vachibva kwaTsambe, vachibva kwaMukaro, vachibva kuSairini. These are the people who fought. Vodzoka voenda kuchikoro vapona hondo. Wopedzera wakuita commander wavo iwewe. How do you command such an erudite and educated army you are illiterate? You think they can endear themselves to them? But akaenda kuDRC hauna vakamubloka hana kana kumboendeswa kunokomanda.
oh, is that so?
Yes.
Oh,
He doesn't know anything about that war, I told you. Kambeu Aginyu ndiye akaendeswa chimopo.
all right.
A field commander of not and uyu hapana zviri papo.
Yeah, it's
He's all a pumped up it, I mean nothing else.
so this thing year 2030 dead, is it going to happen?
He's dead because number one, he trapped them. People did not want this guy. Saka pavakanzwa kuti anga ari kuda kuitwa anointed, vanhu vakati tingasva tagara naaripo pane uchu. So it was a resistance against him 2030. But now number one is outsmarted him by saying handisi kuenda ku2030 tiri kuenda kucongress. Iwo vanhu vari kuti we must stick to the constitution. I agree. But the constitution ipati inoti munoenda kuma-elections, no anointment. This is the crux of the matter, no anointment. And aunovhoterwa nevanhu. And can uchimuona ipo if he goes for a vote, he probably, his left hand may not vote for him.
So and then
in 2017,
yeah.
the military, I tried to convince them kuti mukuregera sei mundaro yachidaiwo. They were completely neutral.
Okay.
I mean, they did not want things to go either side, but they definitely did not want to be unconstitutional.
Okay.
What provoked them to come out of the barracks was the headlong rush Bonyongwe kuti assist the power. Then he wrote my dockets, he signed my dockets, but remember he moved from Director General kuenda kusiku kwa Minister of Justice.
Yes.
Then within 2 months he had signed my dockets ekusunga my general. That's what brought them, because they were it's a question of survival.
Okay. Yeah, so that
vakaudzwa usiku kuti madhokets enyu asainwa and the CIO and mapurisa are going to swoop on you, my general. We've been following these people for so long. Vanofogwa kuti vangatirwise vaine mapistol nema-rifles. That's why the tanks came out. If Bonyongwe had not done that, that thing could probably have dragged out long.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah. He provoked the soldiers from coming out of because he thought he could have a preemptive strike. Because he had been planning to have a preemptive strike. You see, he didn't fight Mozambique. He attended the war kuna Chiwenga, Tanzania.
All right.
All throughout. So he's a stranger to that war. Saka pavakauya vanga vakupromotwa namujuru agenesi vakarwa kuMozambique. So it was a showdown between my initial stages vakawinwa vaisapota namujuru ndosaka vakauraya anagunda. Anagunda ndisiwe kuhondo kuMozambique because kuMozambique you don't plan power in Mozambique because unobongwa mangwana wofa or you get into battle wofa. But in Tanzania kuna Chiwenga anabonyungwe they were at the training school. Na iye uyo na general wedu.
Okay.
Vanozouya kuhondo general vanozouya 78 a year before independence Mozambique. Anabonyungwe never came to Mozambique. Anarugeje he was formerly vanhu ari kuLibya vakaendeswa namuzorewo. He never So this story, yekuti hanzi army inozoti, I tell you, if it was not for that provocation by Bonyongwe, we probably the thing would have taken another 10. He was reckless. He was impatient to grab power because he wanted to become, CC, an intelligence officer who seizes power in a country.
Oh, okay.
Unomziaka CC, Egypt. That's what he wanted to become, Bonyongwe. And you can see Mapanyora Mabuku Aruku Kennedy School of Government, Nana Rothbeck, Cheka Robert Rothbeck, Bonyongwe. He was there. They trained Anna Margaret Longo with the opposition. He trained that opposition in Bonyongwe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he is the one who he moved against the generals, and then there was a showdown. It was an intra-agents showdown.
Okay.
He wanted to carry out a coup against the army under the cover of Mugabe is the legitimate leader. So he wanted to seize power himself.
Okay.
So he moved. Then he made a wrong move. Then information leaked. They was being covered. The Paga signed my dockets. Somebody rang Ningi SB Moy.
Okay.
Mukadzi wake kuti baba varipi. Zvikanzi vakarara zvikanzi in 2 hours vanenge vaiswa makechema vakuendeswa kutreason. So she woke up the husband. The husband then got, we knew that's how they were plotting. Ndovharidzira magenerals ukanzi tochiita showdown ka. That's exactly what happened in 2017. There was no conspiracy by the army to plot to take power.
Okay.
So yaya kufunga kuti because they didn't understand what happened, but wakaitwa outwitted. See, now they are using my template as if it is theirs. Hanzi masoja akangoti masoja achazoti masoja hakuna zvakambodaro kweyo. Final thing besides the African, you can't do certain things in the sub-region unless you got clearance from South Africa, period.
Okay.
You understand?
Yes, I'm seeing it. I think when...
Yeah, remember, that's why I had to go to Cape Town kunoona Zuma.
Yes.
In 2017.
When they raised eyebrows.
Yeah, they are the sub-regional power. Munoitwa changes in South Africa. You call for changes in Zimbabwe. South Africa isingazvizivi. Kana kuMozambique, they intervened because it was news trying to destabilize the success. And South Africa sent the security to protect Chap.
All right.
Yes, and they were ready to move. They were ready to move in with the army.
Wow.
You can't. This is South African neighborhood. It's a regional power. It's sub-regional power. You can't do things which they are not aware of. Rwanda, Kure, this is closer to home.
Yeah, they can respond and react to people. Now, having listened to that, I'm sure you will agree with me when I say that is mind-blowing. But the important factors that Chris Mutsvangwa seemed to indicate were, the first, that he wanted to explain, as much as he could, that he believes that the Zimbabwean army is not activistic, that they were completely neutral before the coup, and they will continue to be completely neutral. The second and most important thing, which he sheds light on regarding the 2030 agenda, is that he says the current president does not want his deputy Chiwenga to take over. He says he doesn't see him as fit. He accuses him of being abusive towards his wife. He accuses him of quite a lot of things in that interview, frankly. And he says the whole Agenda 2030 thing has been set up by the president so that the party can go towards Congress, and at Congress, should the party choose to elect Chiwenga, they can then elect Chiwenga. Of course, as usual, when you speak to Chris, there are a lot of sound bites, there are a lot of versions, stories, a lot of allegations. So he does include stuff, about how he believes Chiwenga didn't quite fight the war. He involves General Mjuri in there, but that's not really like a main pointer. What is a main pointer is that Mutsvangwa does say that he believes that Chiwenga is not fit to be president, and he brings in something we hadn't heard quite before, which is he seems to believe that inside of ZANU-PF itself, they believe that Chiwenga is not electable, and therefore Chiwenga would lead ZANU-PF to a loss at the polls. But Mutsvangwa is an interested party, because you may or may not know this, but the people around him have been saying for years that Mutsvangwa himself is a potential dark horse. We believe, although he doesn't say it in the interview he speaks to us, we believe from speaking to other people that there's a chance that if and when ZANU-PF goes to an elective Congress, that Christopher Mutsvangwa is going to throw his own name, into the hat there, and he believes that he could be president of Zimbabwe. That is something that we heard from 3 independent sources that are close to him. So by that alone, it would be understandable why there would be, why Mutsvangwa would be quite scathing towards Chiwenga. You remember that, back in the day, there was something similar when Mnangagwa became vice president. At the time, it was Professor Jonathan Moyo, who kept on saying to people that, hey, look, it's not a given that Mnangagwa will succeed Mugabe. When the time comes for Mugabe to be succeeded, people will get to choose their leader. And Mutsvangwa is literally just borrowing from the same playbook and saying, this is the path and the road that ZANU-PF is going to take. But as I said, Mutsvangwa is an interested party. So it's quite important when conducting any kind of analysis about any future changes within ZANU-PF, or the opinions about the people on the ground, that we also speak to different people. So what did we do? We reached out to Nixon Mseyamwa. Nick Mseyamwa is a journalist. I've known him for maybe close to a decade. He is the kind of journalist that is in the ground. He's the kind of journalist that will go to a beer hall, he'll go to Mbare, he'll go to the ghetto, he'll go Kumamisha, he'll go to the villages. He's the kind of reporter that wants to go deep into the Bundu, get on the ground, and get to hear the different versions. Of course, the challenges with that is he's getting second-rate information for them most of the time. So you're hearing from people who've heard from somebody else, but he does also have his own contacts. And without preempting, I will lead you into what Nick Mseyamwa says about Agenda 2030. It's quite long, but stick around because there is a lot more coming.
Probably the first thing we should address is what was the genesis of the 2030 campaign? Well, the 2030 campaign started off as an economic blueprint or a vision which is similar. Do you remember in the 90s we used to have Vision 2020, which was being advertised on TV? That's how 2030 started. 2030 started with the president saying Zimbabwe by the year 2030 should be a middle income economy. That's how 2030 started. The vision was to have Zimbabwe as a middle income economy, which means it was a developmental, it had a developmental trajectory where the government aimed at having Zimbabwe as a middle income nation in 2030. But now, guys in ZANU-PF then sat down and said, no, who is the best person to drive the 2030 agenda? And it was agreed that the president should do so. So the main issue was, let's have Zimbabwe as a middle income economy in 2030. Then that's when the president jokingly said, 2030, when Zimbabwe becomes a middle income economy, ndinenge ndiripo. So the ZANU-PF Youth League and Varakashi then took over and said, 2030, vanenge varipo. That's how the ndinenge ndiripo started. So the even issue was, we want to develop Zimbabwe to become a middle income economy. Then the president said, yes, as we develop it, in 2030, I will also be there. But it was not clear then, will he be there as the leader or just there? So the ZANU-PF Youth League and Varakash then took it over and said, right, 2030, president, and the Tinenge Tiripo was later changed. President Idi Chiwenga. We need to address one issue. You were close to the situation in 2017. Probably you know better than me. But as I spoke with my sources within the system, there was an agreement between His Excellency and VP Chiwenga that the president would do his 2 terms. After doing his 2 terms, he leaves power either to one of the two, VP Chiwenga or Valerio Swanda. That's why you realize that when Valerio Swanda, sometime last year, he was co-opted into the Politburo. I think you remember that, and there was a lot of noise on that, and the decision was later reversed. Right. So there was an agreement between the two, a gentleman's agreement between the two. You do your 2 terms. After the 2 terms, if VP Chiwenga is alive, he will take over. If he's not, and Valerio is alive, he will take over. I don't know if in 2017 and 2018 you managed to get that information. Right. So that's why there is a bit of trouble with the 2030. And that's why the VP Chiwenga stopped shouting 2030. Because to him, it was sort of a betrayal, a regression from the agreement which they made between themselves, ED and Chiwenga, that you do your 2 terms. We have risked our lives. You do your 2 terms and you go. But now there was now shout for 2030. Who is behind 2030? The reality, with no any shadow of doubt, is the president himself. He is interested in ruling Zimbabwe beyond 2030. He is interested in ruling Zimbabwe 2030. But like what he always do in his political life, he uses proxies to gauge the temperature of any decisions that he makes. Remember when Twitter were discussing about Dinyane, he was the power behind Dinyane, but he used other people to front his agenda. The 2030 agenda, he became interested and he wants it, or rather he wanted, since he has now said he's stepping down, he wanted to be the president too in 2030. But now, check this, Maynard. There are senior ZANU-PF members who have never said anything about 2030. Obed Mpofu, he has never endorsed. He writes a lot of articles in the newspaper. He has never spoken about 2030. The man himself, even Kembo Mahadi, has never spoken about 2030. Chris Mutsvangwa, he oscillates. At one time he says, well, talking about 2030, it shuts out all those who have ambition to succeed the president. But he didn't explicitly deny or confirm that he is for 2030, but he is not. Together with his wife, they are not for 2030. Right? Then of course we have the VP himself, Chiwenga again is not for the 2030. Most senior, those senior ZANU-PF officials, the seniors ones, they are against 2030. All right, so what does he do? He harnesses all his political appointees who is in 2030 agenda. Jeffran Mswere, who is a very close friend of ED and his sons. Tino Machakaire, of course, who is close again to ED and his sons. The minister Tatenda Mavetera, and of course the godfather of Midlands, July Moyo, and of course again Owen Muda Ngove is the ndo wakatotanga nayo kuita front runner to 2030 vamuidi vanenge varipo. Owen Muda Ngove. Then in Matebeleland we have the whole verse like Jawalan Svanda is also there within the 20, those who are pushing for the 2030. Then we've got Mabel Chinomona again, she's there pushing 2030. Then Kumaswingo, we have the Minister of State and Minister of State in Maswingo, Lavmo Matuke, is also there within the 2030. We move. We have Ziambi, we have Kazembe. Who else? Yes, we have Kazembe. Of course, in the Youth League, we have John Paradza, a very powerful. He's more powerful than Tino Machakaire actually. John Paradza is the deputy for Tino Machakaire, is also there within the 2030 movement. Those who are pushing for 2030. Who else? I'm forgetting the other. Who else? I mentioned Ziambi. I mentioned Kazembe. In fact, almost all provincial chairpersons, except Mashonaland East, where the VP hails from, except all other 9 provincial chairpersons, they are the 2030 team, except Mashonaland East.
So, in the view of Nick Msayamwa, this is what is happening with the 2030 agenda. And we did one better for you, nonetheless. We went and we spoke to Philip Chibata. I'll introduce Chibata to you. Philip Chibata is a very close ally of President Mnangagwa. In fact, he has been part of President Mnangagwa's team for several decades. He is literally the president's brother. And we reached out to him because he, over the years, has always been a useful hub and source for information and for insight. And again, just like with Nick, we will let Philip Chibata speak. And you can hear from the conversations that we had with him, and you can make up your mind from there going forward.
Who is the minister who is celebrating this? Those who do not have support. Number one, Ziambi, who lost an election, try to bribe people, try to use staggering ways of coming in. Number two, Garwe lost the chairmanship, and he was helped by the system. And he lost election. He was helped by the system. They rigged for him. And then we go to number 3. We have who else is making noise? Mutsvangwa. Mutsvangwa actually lost in a primary election, and they used dubious ways of disqualifying the guy that beat him hands down. And then they said they are not going to run another primary because this guy is qualified. So the next person automatically come in. If he had gone for an election, someone put him there, I know they would not have voted for him. So you look at the characters that are running around talking about the 2030. You look in Midlands, it's Muda. And the people like in Harare, Masimilebo, people with issues that they should be prosecuted for. So you look at them and say, these guys are singing for their supper. And they have to be doing that. So as a nation, we need to begin to build up where we can begin to say, guys, when your 2 terms are done, you're done. You can remain a president, you remain a president. Today was good, but nobody believes him now because they're saying, why was he why was he quiet all along? And we're now being saying, but they said it 4 times. But why?
From your view, Ngoma, after today, do you reckon this is the end of this group who are not candidate?
No, it is beginning of, because now we are going to begin to witness fist fights.
Okay.
It had never degenerated to fist fights, but from now on, it's going to degenerate into fist fights. Why? Because now the other side that was being bullied is now going to start standing up and start saying no. Once they start saying no, push their agenda. On.
Okay.
Because panga pane my agenda ekudzingana mupati anga achitoripo izvezvi as we speak.
Wow.
Pakatotarget kwavanhu kuti vanofanira kudzingwa mupati because havasi kusupporta president, agenda yapresident. Which one is now the agenda yapresident? And which people are in the right? You find that the people who are making decisions are in the wrong are the people that are now supposed to be in the right. And the people that have been calling themselves in the right are the people that are in the wrong.
Okay.
You know, what we were telling people was, stand with the word of the president. They were telling them, more that we stand with the president. What the president says is what we do. We don't want people who force the president to do what he doesn't want to do.
Okay.
And for some reasons, now they have an upper hand.
As you can imagine, having listened to what Mutsvangwa says, and then having listened to what Nick Mutsvangwa says, and now having listened to what Philip Chabata says, you would realize that there are so many versions of the truth, so many versions of what's going on. And from what we've learned over the years with Zimbabwe, there are always so many shades of the different colors at play. So if we have blue, it's going to have so many shades and so many variations. So it's not that everything that is said is totally true or it's totally a lie, but it's just that bits and pieces of that will always be true depending on who you speak to. But what is important is what we then did. As we always promise with the inside story, we always then take the questions to the powers that be, or at least next to the powers that be, to then, compare and bring you what is a loaded analysis, not just serving you up different interviews and different conversations. And one of the first things that we did was reach out to sources that are very close to Ziyambi, the Justice Minister. Now, Ziyambi is a very important player within the 2030 agenda because, one, he is the Justice Minister, and he is long thought to be the pioneer or the pillar or the architect, rather, of all the constitutional amendments that are at play. He is almost essentially the president's lawyer. I know he's the head of government business in parliament, but he is largely seen as the person that President Mnangagwa goes to when he has a legal problem. Now, we already know that when it comes to the president serving beyond 2028, there is a constitutional problem there. There is a legality challenge. And Ziyambi would be the one who would get tasked to sort of fix that. And when we reached out to sources close to him, we got something that was quite interesting. So our understanding is Ziyambi isn't necessarily pushing to keep Idi in power till 2030. Our sources say he is pushing something called an Agenda 2030. And to almost quote what they said word for word, one particular source said, hey, look, if I say to you that, Maynard, I want to create a legacy where 100 years from now in 2100 or in 2130, that I want my family or my legacy to be this way, that doesn't mean I'll be alive. And he actually shared with us blueprints from countries like China, from countries like Japan, that show how they are creating policies and roadmaps for development and eradicating poverty that have got no capacity to benefit the present generation, if not even the next one. You're talking about things that will have a major impact at least 100 years from now going forward. And he said that is precisely how we see things. He also said that, look, believe it or not, the Minister of Justice is a ZANU-PF supporter through and through. He would be a ZANU-PF supporter if Mnangagwa was in power. He would be a ZANU-PF supporter if Chiwenga was in power. And he outright, told us that, hey, look, this thing where people are saying Ziyambi is against Chiwenga, he's the one who's helping to fight ED's battles, it's totally untrue. He's the justice minister, yes, but he's a ZANU-PF cadre. He will listen to the president. And if anything, we are made to believe that what Ziyambi is really concerned about is ways in which he can help secure ZANU-PF an election victory in 2028. Now, you will know that Ziyambi would be the chief election agent for whoever is president at the time, if he's justice minister, and if he's also the secretary for legal affairs at ZANU-PF, although that's an entirely different rabbit hole altogether. But nonetheless, in the last election, he was the chief election agent for the president, and he had the same position in 2018. So he's concerned with securing, ZANU-PF's victory to polls. He's a ZANU-PF cadre. He is a comrade by all accounts, and succession is not anything that he's more loyal to than ZANU-PF itself. We then went deeper to obviously the one that you want to know about, which is, other than speaking to Chabata, we then tried to get an answer from the presidency itself, right? And please make note, I said the presidency, not the president. So I'm not quoting what the president has told me. I didn't speak to him regarding this particular subject. But nonetheless, we did pose questions. And one of the answers that we have is that when Philip Chabata asked the president to say, there's this 2030 thing going on, are you interested in running? The president told his brother that, no, I'm not going to run in 2030. No, that's not true. And when we spoke to people who are very close, well, within the presidents themselves, they also said the same thing. And they said the president has addressed the issue of succession 5 times. For some reason, it keeps popping up, and I'll get back to the for some reason part, but it keeps popping up, but this has been addressed. And to be fair to them, this was about a month ago or some weeks ago. And straight after the last time that the president said the whole 2030 thing was dead and buried in the water, there was a significant pushback to the people that were propagating it. Now, recall I said that, that it kept going on, for some other reason. That other reason has been the web brigades. So basically, web brigades are your paid online trolls or your paid figures or your paid influencers. They're basically a web brigade, a brigade that operates online to manage perceptions. Think of them like perception engineers. And the bulk of them, popularly or commonly called, Varakashi, the new age Varakashi rather, they were propagating this thing that ED should remain in office, and they were doing it directly and unashamedly so. That has significantly toned down since the last time that the president spoke. And that's because after that happened, there was also a bit of a clampdown. There was some commotion with organization Varakashi for ED, with John Zimsara and so forth, and Chinamas. There's a lot going on there, but the messaging around 2030 all but stopped entirely after that last part. They're just like little attempts here and there on the web, to sort of bring it up, but it's not as widely orchestrated as it was, a month ago when you had people dancing at the Heroes Acre. And so beyond that, beyond the president itself, or rather beyond our sources within the presidency telling us that ED doesn't want to run for 2030. They also proffered an explanation, and an explanation which is quite supported. Now, in the media, it was reported, and I think I didn't mention it on Twitter, that there were some optics that didn't look right at the National Heroes Acre, especially involving the Minister of ICT, Tatenda Mavetera. But the explanation there was the minister arrived a little earlier than Chiwenga, and she arrived with her girls and her entourage and her people. And at every burial or ZANU-PF rally, apparently this is what they always do. They always show up, they sing and dance, and ultimately, the conversations being heard behind the curtains are that Mavetera wasn't out to disrespect Chiwenga. She wasn't out to insult Chiwenga. Of course, the visuals are there, and people get to make up their own minds. But that is another explanation that was proffered. But as I'm saying, after the last address, there was a significant pushback towards the slightly younger people within Varakashi, people who basically joined ZANU-PF or joined that train of web brigades post 2019, 2020, and a lot of them post 2021, 2022. And you've seen a lot of the original people, the original Warakashis, the people that ran under Philip Chabata. At the time, it was Philip Chabata and Charity Manyeruke. They were running Warakashi, and Nick Mangwana. And you've now had people aligned to them coming out and pushing back on this idea of the new Warakashis were doing a lot of this attacking. We fact-checked what Chris Mutsvangwa said, that Mnangagwa was the one who was behind the 2030 agenda, but only because he wants to save the people from Chiwenga and from a Chiwenga presidency. And we couldn't confirm that. In fact, that particular story made its way to the president's ears, and he was flabbergasted. In fact, to quote, he actually said, what is Mutsvangwa saying? He's mad. So ultimately, we couldn't get confirmation from the horse's mouth that what Mutsvangwa is saying is true, that the president, he is doing this so that he paves the way for someone else to take over ZANU-PF other than Chiwenga. In fact, the message that we got was that, according to the president, he actually said, Chiwenga, mningna wangu ndoshanda naye, mningna wangu pamoyo. Ultimately, or much rather, Chiwenga is my beloved young brother, is my young brother. We work together, and these are conversations that were being heard had in secluded places. So we can comfortably say that, at the time of publishing this, that Mutsvangwa's version, though mind-blowing and full of sound bites, is a version that is rejected by the presidency in Zimbabwe. It's also rejected by people who are close to both individuals. Another important thing, which Mutsvangwa raises, which is that he says the Zimbabwean army is not activistic in nature, and they only acted because Bonyongwe wanted to get them arrested. But Bonyongwe doesn't say this in his book, that he tried to get them arrested. There's also a long-held belief by people within G40 where they claim that it's not true, that there was a plot to arrest the generals and so forth. It's a version that Mutsvangwa has put forward, but we couldn't really quite prove it. But we wouldn't go as far as saying that it was untrue, because we do know that when Emmerson Mnangagwa got fired and he escaped via Mozambique to South Africa, General Chiwenga actually left the country afterwards to go to China for a pre-planned visit. He went for his visit and he came back for his visit without necessarily interfering or intervening. And when he came back, the coup didn't happen the next day. In fact, the first thing they did was call a press conference that addressed their concerns, and they asked to see Mugabe. Mugabe ignored them, and sometime between the 12th or the 11th and the 13th, something triggered that response that even Mugabe himself couldn't see coming. But it was important to sort of put that in context. We are lucky at Dagap to have military sources of our own, and we were able to reach out to the army. We did confirm that the members of the army do see themselves as neutral, or at least they try to be neutral, but they're neutral with an affiliation towards ZANU-PF. So it's impossible to divorce the Zimbabwe Defense Forces from ZANU-PF. You can pretty much almost say the Zimbabwe Defense Forces is an extension or a wing. It's the military arm of ZANU-PF, and that's just a fact. So they can't be divorced from that. But where there were variances was that the military would be completely neutral, for instance, if Chiwenga was victimized or what was happening was being attacked, because ultimately the military leaders delivered an Emmerson Mnangagwa presidency. If you were to say it flat off the bag, G40 had outmaneuvered Lacoste. They had won that political fight. Then the army stepped in, and that resulted in a change of fortunes. So our understanding, regardless of what Mutsvangwa says, that the army is not, activistic in nature, our understanding is that the Zimbabwe National Army is still very much loyal to ZANU-PF, and they would appreciate a Constantino Chiwenga presidency, regardless of what Mutsvangwa says. The only side challenge, I suppose, there is that Mutsvangwa is a former soldier himself. He's a former liberation war soldier. He went back to school after the war and so forth, as he says in his interview. And I mean, he's a respected war veteran. And soldiers and war veterans have a very, very strict code of respect. As you will notice, when Mutsvangwa was speaking about Blessed Geza, he was not as scathing as he would if he was talking about Chamisa or about something else. He was very respectful. He was very respectful. He said it's a matter for the party to deal with. He wasn't antagonistic, and he wasn't outright rude or insulting. And he acknowledges in our interview that is because he sees Blessed Geza as a colleague. They were together in Mozambique. They were together in the war. And that is something that you will see, that you'll find that it's very difficult to find war veterans who, unless they really have no other option, they will avoid, by all accounts or by all attempts, going cutthroat to cutthroat with each other. So then I suppose the big question is, where does Chiwenga stand in all of this, and what is his views? Now, Chiwenga is a very, I'd say, loyal person. He really believes in patience, and he believes in things of the spirit. And Chiwenga could have been president after the coup. In fact, Paul Kagame from Rwanda was even urging him to say, look, just take over, that's how I came into power. Museveni was telling him the same thing. But he rejected because Mazibaba Wembo, if you remember him, and the people from that church, he had been told that it's not your turn and it's not your time. God has chosen this guy to take over, and you will take over after him. So it was and is very unlikely that Chiwenga, would disregard that spiritual advice and then act to remove ED. So using that as a barometer, and what we know from 2017, right, as to why he refused to be president and asked Mnangagwa to come back, we know that Chiwenga will not try to be president. And where does he stand in this? He is still very respectful, surprisingly. People might say this is surprising, he was getting insulted, but he is still quite, very respectful. The people that speak to him on WhatsApp mention that even when you talk to him, his responses, they're quite direct. He will always thank the president. He will always stress that they are all under the leadership of the president, that they're aiming, to fulfill his mandate. So as far as Chiwenga knows, and as far as Chiwenga is concerned, they are working towards Agenda 2030 as a development goal. Agenda 2030 is about trying to realize that vision that ED has, and that vision will carry on even after ED leaves office in 2028. So we know for a fact that is where he stands. In terms of what happened at the Heroes Acre and the people that were attacking him and web brigades, our understanding is that as a military man, Chiwenga believes that it's nonsense, really. Doesn't pay attention to it, doesn't really care. He saw it, he thought, these are just stupid people, they're being silly. And ultimately that is what we're told, quote for quote, that he dismissed it with contempt. Now, I mean, I've been privileged to spend quite a lot of time with people in the army, and they don't like civilians. For some reason, they think we are not smart enough. They think we don't really understand things. There was my civilian ones we see. They think civilians are just dumb people and they're difficult and they don't have discipline. So you'll find that there's a lot of attitude of, by Chiwenga himself to ignore what looks like civilian folly in his mind. But rest assured, obviously, he is a man who's quite aware of what's happening around him. He did suffer some form of poisoning that almost cost him his life. So he's very aware and he's very circumspect. So for that reason, he will always exercise caution. But from his side, there is no enmity or aggression towards President Mnangagwa at the moment. The thing with politics, of course, is that anything can change. Like I said, Chiwenga didn't want to do a coup in 2017, but something changed over that course of 24 to 48 hours that forced his hand. So something can happen that can force his hand. But the overall analysis from the inside story is that between Edie and Chiwenga, they're getting along very well. And funny enough, I wrote an article before Dagap was a thing. I wrote an article for Zim Life, and I mentioned that they, despite persistent and consistent reports that these guys were enemies, they were not enemies. There was no aggression, there was no enmity. They were going on well. They were getting along very well. But a lot changed after that. We now had, very young boys, people in their 20s, openly waking up and attacking the military, attacking Vice President Chiwenga, attacking the generals. Things that you should, you should never do out of good conscience, because I always say to people, look, CIOs are one thing, right? The army is not, they're killing machines, and it's not really good to play those kind of games with them. But the way people were doing that, and the understanding was that nobody can do that unless they believe that they're stepping on a big stone, right? So if you see your dog starting to bark at you, it's because it believes there's a new sheriff in town. So that was the understanding then, but we tried our best to find out as much as we could, and I think we came to the conclusion that a month ago they were at Dagga's drone, and that we know for sure. I think I mentioned it on Twitter myself prior, that there was quite a scathing meeting, where the bottom leadership went out and asked questions to say, these people that are attacking us, are they being sent? But the response to them, as was the response to us, was that no, there are so many factions in this. There are people who, for instance, don't have political capital, and these people are dependent on Emmerson Mnangagwa remaining president, right? And the easiest way to check for these people is look for the people that didn't win in their primaries and couldn't contest as NPF candidates. Look for the people that didn't win but were still made candidates. Then look for the people that lost the actual elections but have still managed to come back or find their way in government, either as ministers or in senior positions. Those people would likely fall apart and fall away when a new presidency comes around in Zimbabwe. So they really have a lot to lose. Look at the people, for instance, the extremely wealthy people, right? Some on sanctions, some on the cusp of being sanctions. Those people need Emmerson Mnangagwa to remain in power, because when a new president comes in, he's going to come in with his own people. When Mugabe left, when Mnangagwa came in, Team Midlands came in. I'm from Midlands myself, so I kind of know in terms of how easy it was for my homeboys to get doors open for them, just by virtue of Vashai, it's just how it is in Zim. So a lot of doors were being opened for people by that way. So those people would benefit from Mnangagwa remaining as president. So they will fight till the death to try and convince him, or to try and push to make sure that the Mnangagwa presidency continues. But analyzing the various factors at play, because look, the president is just but one individual. The deep state is more powerful. There are a lot. The system, I always say to people, the system itself is a completely different thing as compared to just individuals, and the system has got checks and balances that will that will ensure that there is a transition at some point. So that is pretty much most of what we could find. Yeah, and I think the only thing that I've forgotten was, is there a potential front runner? And our understanding is Mutsvangwa will throw his name into the hat at the next Congress, because he believes he can usurp Chiwenga. But our understanding is there is no front runner at the moment. There are a lot of wealthy individuals that believe that they can be president. Your Tagwireis and so forth, they think that I could be president. Your Chifayos, they think maybe they have a chance afterwards. But when you strip away the chaff and you remove the nonsense and you get to the truly significant things, the only person who was going to succeed Emmerson Mnangagwa, unless there is a significant shift, is Chiwenga. And all of what's been happening was politics, and that's been straightened out, at least for now. They are not at Dagga's drone anymore. But I'll leave you with a quote from Banim Tomboti. I think he's a South African journalist, and he was talking about Zuma and Ramaphosa fighting, and he said they may be at Dagga's drone. Civil war is broken out at the very top of the party. They may be at Dagga's drone, but they're not likely to go their separate ways. Power is too irresistible for them. Power is the glue that keeps them together. So anytime you see that happening, just remember that they will look like they're daggers drawn, but they're unlikely to go their separate ways. As for the interviews, well, that gives you context, interesting perspectives, versions, and what's happening. It's politics after all. And I'm Maynard Manyoa, and thank you for tuning into the Inside Story. See you next time. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can my audio be picked? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.